Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal at the gates, a term used by Italians whenever a disaster has struck, a term far too real for the Romans during the Second Punic War. The name Hannibal, synonymous with death and annihilation on an epic scale. Today, kiddies, we travel back to 216 BC, to the heart of the Second Punic War on the Italian peninsula, where Hannibal has done the impossible, crossing the Alps and laying Roman legions to waste as he travels. How many legions had Hannibal's barbarians driven asunder? 20,000 or so at the River Trebia, 16,000 or so at Lake Trasimene. Whole Roman armies were annihilated as Hannibal Barca led his barbarian hordes through the Italian peninsula in the name of the Carthaginian Empire. The Second Punic War saw Hannibal fulfilling a blood oath given to his father when he was young to carry out the destruction of Rome and everything Rome stood for. Now, Hannibal faces his biggest challenge yet, a challenge far greater than any he has had to face before. Now at Cannae, 90,000 Roman legions will array in battle formation in an effort to destroy Hannibal once and for all. But Hannibal is ready to meet these Romans, employing a strategy not yet seen on any Western battlefield. It's a gamble, but big risk brings big reward. And Hannibal wants nothing more than to see these Roman dogs before him driven asunder, decimated, annihilated, forever, never to pose a threat to the Carthaginian Empire ever again. But this is the battle Hannibal wants, not siege of a city, but to meet the Roman legions on the battlefield head to head. Hannibal and his army were the first to arrive near Cannae, giving Hannibal the opportunity to pick his battlefield. And in a strategically brilliant maneuver, Hannibal took control of the Aufidus River, the only viable water source in the area. He then faced his army north. These two maneuvers put heavy strains on the enormous Roman army, who were poached in the August heat, having to struggle for any water to keep the Roman legions from falling out from dehydration. And the Romans would face south directly into a hot, fierce Labiecian wind that constantly blew dirt and dust in the Romans' eyes, further disrupting the Romans' concentration. And Hannibal also hurt the mobility of the Roman cavalry, being so close to the river Aufidus. This will play a major factor in the battle ahead. Also, due to Hannibal's placement, the Roman legions had to form up deeper than they could wide, which would also play into Hannibal's plan at Cannae. For months, the Romans had held the Fabian strategy, but when co-consuls Lucius Paulus and Terentius Varro were elected, Hannibal knew he would eventually draw Varro into a fight, being rather hot-headed and brash, and with every co-consul swapping days as overall commander, Hannibal bided his time until he finally drew Varro to want to break from the Fabian strategy and attack. It should also be noted that the Roman people also wanted to fight. They were tired of hiding. They were tired of the Fabian strategy, a strategy that was not working. For Hannibal was decimating the farmland and the countryside of Italy with his marching around. So, co-consuls were elected to lead around 90,000 Romans into a battle to deal with Hannibal once and for all. So Paulus and Varro did basically shadow Hannibal, and the Romans did even eventually win a skirmish leading up to Cannae, which most likely bolstered the Roman confidence. But Paulus still remained cautious in facing Hannibal on the open battlefield. The Romans eventually formed two camps, one as the main camp, the other to provide some protection for the Roman foragers who were having to go out for water and food to feed this vast army. On August 1st, 216 BC, Hannibal arranged for battle, but Paulus, in command that day, did not bite, not leaving camp, leaving Hannibal to sit in his battle formations. So Hannibal eventually sent his cavalry to harass the Roman foraging camp, disrupting the Romans' much-needed water and food supply. As August 2nd drew up, August 2nd, 216 BC, Varro became in command of the Roman legion. This was who Hannibal wanted, and When Hannibal arranged for battle, Varro didn't hesitate to answer, moving his many legions and supporting troops into position. It is said, upon seeing the massive Roman army, a Carthaginian officer named Gisgo told Hannibal how he was amazed at the size of this Roman army. And Hannibal replied, "There's one thing, Gisgo, yet more astonishing, which you take no notice of. In all those great numbers before us, there's not one man called Gisgo." This statement caused a wave of laughter to surge throughout the Carthaginian ranks who had confidence in themselves and much confidence in their commander Hannibal. The Carthaginian army, a battle-hardened group, numbered around 40,000, including Libyans, Gauls, Iberians, Lusitanians. Hannibal's cavalry were around 10,000, including Numidian, Iberian, Gallic, and other African cavalry units, with quite a few slinger units in support. These many diverse units, many diverse peoples, unified under one leader, had one unifying fact. That was their leader, Hannibal Barca, and their belief in him. As far as the Carthaginian units, the Numidian light cavalry wore no armor or even had saddles. They carried very small shields, javelins, and usually a small blade. The Iberian cavalry were a more heavy cavalry type with round shields, swords, and thrusting spears. The Gallic cavalry was also considered heavy cavalry, using four-handed saddle horns for saddles, swords, and many had even the earliest forms of chainmail they wore. The Balearic slingers were light infantry known for being accurate with slings. Many of the heavy infantry was armed with Roman weapons taken from earlier Roman defeats, a clever way to resupply your battle formations with the equipment of the dead army you have defeated. The Gauls would be carrying a broadsword, usually going into battle naked, in an effort for shock and awe. This added very much to their ferocity. Roman legions, on the other hand, were standardized using the pila, which was a heavy spear, and a Roman short sword called a gladius, as well as the standard bronze body armor and shield and bronze helmet. The Roman army deployed in a standard formation, infantry in the center with both wings carried by the Roman cavalry. But to face the Carthaginian army, they had to face into the blistering wind, blowing dust and dirt constantly in their face. Now, Varro also had to deploy his infantry in a deeper rather than wide formation, with the maniples being deeper than usual and also closer than usual. One reason was he had the Adolphus River on one side, but he also knew Hannibal's center had been broken before at Trebia, and Varro wanted to exploit this, what he considered weakness. The Principes were just behind the Hastati, ready to push at first contact with Hannibal's barbarian hordes. This deeper rather than wider array of the Roman maniples did allow Hannibal to match the width of the main infantry in the center with his far less numerous heavy infantry. Roman doctrine for the legions at the time was to push and overwhelm the enemy with sheer force and numbers. Hannibal knew this and also knew that each co-consul commanded the outer wings, not the center of this numerous Roman force of 90,000 troops. So at the battle's outset, Hannibal arrayed his battle formations into a totally new formation. His Gauls and Celts and Iberians, his heavy infantry, were arrayed in the center, while his flanks to the infantry were his African troops, who were a lighter infantry, and they were flanked on the outside by the Hispanic and Gallic cavalry on the left flank, led by Hasdrubal, who had around 6,000 to 7,000 cavalry, and Hanno on the right with 3,000 to 4,000 Numidian light cavalry. Hannibal had also deployed so that the Romans would face the morning sun and that the wind would blow directly into the Romans' faces, causing disruption of vision periodically with the Roman legions. As Hannibal's divisions moved forward, they arrayed into a wedge formation, or what we would now know as echelon, with Hannibal leading the tip of the wedge, facing 3-to-1 odds with his brother Mago. As Hannibal arrayed into this crescent formation, or echelon formation, so to speak, he kept stretching and stretching until his infantry wings, his African reserves, basically became reserves, hidden in plain view on the battlefield. Reserves that would be a deadly factor in the battle to come. The Hispanic and Celts were to take the brunt of the initial engagement, but Hannibal would be right there with them in the thick of the battle. Hannibal would be leading his Celts and Hispanic infantry and would ask them to hold for as long as they could and to take the brunt of the Romans' first attack and only give inch by inch, never disengaging, but always giving the Romans a fight as they retreated, hoping to make the Romans overextend. And that's when Hannibal's brilliance on the battlefield would shine. The battle, though, began on the cavalry flanks. As the Carthaginian cavalry on the left slammed into the Roman cavalry, they dismounted, cutting down and just dismantling the Roman cavalry, giving their Roman counterparts no quarter. While Hanno and his Numidian cavalry on the right flank just did what they could to keep their counterparts occupied. Hasdrubal, showing his adept battle skill, did not pursue the Roman cavalry as they fled before him. He regathered, rode to Hanno's side to assist the Numidian light cavalry with their foe. But the Romans, seeing Hasdrubal approaching, routed and were being chased off the battlefield by the Numidian light cavalry. The infantry, meanwhile, were marching forward, getting closer and closer to one another. When the centers eventually crashed into one another, Hannibal and Mayo fought ferociously directly from the center, driving his force into following his command. Eventually, though, they were retreating, drawing the Roman maniples in further and further. The further the Romans advanced, pushing Hannibal's center back into itself, the Roman maniples began to tighten and tighten. Many men in the center of the legions could not even raise their weapons or shields. This is when Hannibal's brilliance shines. His infantry wings, his African troops, who had basically stood in reserve in the wide open on the battlefield, now flanked the Roman legions, smashing into the sides of the maniples. Maniples designed to move forward and backward. They were not designed to fight a 360-degree battle on a 360-degree battlefield. They then, at the same time, were instantly smashed from the back by Hasdrubal and his cavalry, who had rested and regathered to attack the Roman legion's infantry at the rear to box them in. This double envelopment or pincher maneuver was the first ever seen on a Western battlefield, and with Hasdrubal smashing the Romans' rear, the Roman legions, already being compacted, were now trapped. Many Romans fell to their death, unable to lift their arms due to being so compacted in the center. They figure it takes about 6 hours to kill around 70 to 80,000 Romans in hand-to-hand combat. Hannibal's much smaller army annihilated the Romans using never-before-seen tactics, the largest loss of life on a battlefield until World War I. Now take that into consideration. 216 BC to the early 1900s, over 2,000 years. Many Roman nobles died at Cannae. 2 quaestoriars, 29 and 48 tribunes, some were even former consuls, a magister equitum, and 80 or so senators, or men who had held office in the Roman Senate. The Romans were sent into pure disarray. Most of southern Italy joined Hannibal, doing away with their ties to Rome and fear of Hannibal's might. The Roman morale after Cannae also shows the rise of a Roman general who will make his own mark on history. A couple of military tribunes who had been able to survive Cannae were discussing leaving the Roman peninsula and go overseas and finding employments as mercenaries. These tribunes were heard discussing this by a young Publius Cornelius Scipio, who followed them and burst into the room with these tribunes with his sword in hand, waving above his head, and said to these men, "I swear with all the passion in my heart that I will never desert my homeland or permit any other of Rome from leaving Rome in lurch. If I willfully break my oath, may Jupiter, greatest and best, bring me to a shameful death with my house, my family, and all I possess. Swear this oath, Caecilius, and the rest of you swear it too. If anyone refuses this sword is drawn. This same Publius Cornelius Scipio will use Hannibal's own tactics, eventually facing Hannibal at Zama. But that's a tale for another day. After Cannae, Hannibal was told by Marhable, the Numidian cavalry commander, you know how to gain a victory. You do not know how to use it, Hannibal. This was said after Hannibal refused to lay siege to Rome. In Hannibal's defense, his army was weakened after Cannae and in no condition to lay siege to a city such as Rome. Rome adopted the Famaean strategy once more, staying in their cities, not facing Hannibal on the battlefield. And coupled with Hannibal's growing opposition in the Carthaginian Senate, a Senate which denied any reinforcements for Hannibal, Hannibal eventually had to leave the Italian peninsula, and he eventually met Scipio at the battlefield of Zama. The Second Punic War showed the brilliance of Hannibal Barca, the scourge of Rome. Hannibal Barca being one of the finest military commanders of all time. His tactics still studied at military academies around the world today. I'm Big Duke 6 for CoolKegs Studios, and this is my greatest battles of history. Please like, subscribe, hit the noti bell, comment. Thanks again to everyone who has supported the channel and watched our content. And remember, people, civis pacem para bellum. If you want peace, prepare for war.